that's already had a tough hit from the oil spill, and we're going to take businesses done nothing wrong, and we're going to basically shut them down because of some mandate. And somehow or other, I don't see that as being government the servant. Do you?
Well, and in fact, it's exactly the opposite of the government being the servant. It's the government being the oppressor. And as I mentioned, 12,000 jobs have already been lost in South Louisiana alone. And these aren't my numbers. This is the White House. And the White House and the President's response to that was, well, they can just go get unemployment. These aren't people who want to be on unemployment rolls. They're hard-working people who love and have a great, strong work ethic. They want to be contributing to America's energy security, but it's this administration that shut them down and not allowed them to go back to work drilling safely. And I'm talking again, I'm not talking about BP. I'm talking about the companies who have played by the rules all along, who have never had any safety problems because they follow a higher standard. They're the ones that have been shut down and put out of work. And not only is it affecting Louisiana in terms of the 12,000 jobs, it has now affected America's energy security, because right now nationally, this is a time, once you get out of the summer, where gas prices typically start falling again. But what are we seeing? We're seeing the opposite of that. And now gas prices are breaking over the $3 a gallon mark in many states because, in part, this administration has changed our energy policy where we've shut off more areas of energy production in America, which means these Middle Eastern countries, many of whom don't like us, other foreign countries are now producing the energy that we need, which reverses our trade balance. It sends billions of dollars and thousands of jobs to foreign countries out of America, and then it makes our country less secure, which is why we're approaching $100 a barrel gasoline now, because the United States of America has basically said through President Obama's policies, we're going to shut off most of our sources of known energy, but of course our demand for energy hasn't dropped in the country, so that means we're now going to have to be more reliant on many of these foreign countries who don't like us. So it's got not only devastating consequences in terms of 12,000 lost jobs in South Louisiana, but also devastating effects on America's energy security, which now we're seeing reflected in these gas prices that are now breaking $3 a gallon. And I yield back.
Congressman, you've talked about Louisiana, and I appreciate that perspective, and that's the specifics. We sort of back up a little bit from what you've said and take a look at the subject here we're talking about today is cutting government. If you take a look at the Department of Energy was founded years and years ago with the purpose of making sure that we were not dependent on foreign oil. Now, that department has grown with more and more and more buildings and bureaucrats and people in it, I'm sure with well-meaning intention. But as the department has grown, we've become more dependent on foreign oil. Now, there's something in that equation that's fundamentally nuts. And so we have to take a really good look at this subject. I am interested, too, that sometimes I point out to my constituents, I think people don't understand this, but Congress, our opinions in this chamber are pretty divided. If I were to say to some of my constituents that there is a big difference between Republicans and Democrats on the abortion issue, they'd go, gee whiz, no big surprise. But they may be surprised to know that if you look at voting records, there is a bigger difference on development of American energy between Republicans and Democrats than there is on the abortion thing. So there's very difference of opinion as to whether or not we need to become energy independent in this country. And I'm glad you got the common sense to say we need to be energy independent. We need to develop all of our resources for energy. And the fact that you've taken a strong stand on that, Steve, I think you're doing a great job for Louisiana. And it's a treat to have you joining us here today and bringing that expertise. And I'm going to run back over to Georgia a little bit and jump over here to Representative Graves and jump in, please.
Yes, well, thank you for yielding some time. And, Madam Speaker, this should be the final few minutes of my discussion as I'm going to leave and yield to the gentleman from Utah. And I sort of want to follow up on what he said, but before I do, I want to point out that the Republican Study Committee, of which I believe all of us are members of and actively a part of, is putting together a rescissions plan which has $2.6 trillion in cuts identified already that would occur over the next 10 years. And it's an amazing set of proposals that to me, as we stand here today in the majority, John Boehner is our speaker that we nominated, we elected, and we're still talking about spending being the #1 issue. That's how committed we are. Going back to the gentleman's statement, he was referring to the Constitution and general welfare clause in the preamble there, and I thought I'd bring up an interesting point, because it says to promote the general welfare, not provide the general welfare. Interesting distinction there, and what a notion we have taken from a central government role to want to provide for everyone. But if you go one clause prior to that, it says provide for common defense, not promote, but provide common defense and promote general welfare. Two distinct differences in clauses, and we've certainly mistaken that second clause there.
You know, that is such a good point. I don't think it does any harm to repeat that. Let's go back through it again. We're talking about the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. It sets the whole framework for what this country rests on. And you've got two words that are loaded with meaning. The first one is the general defense. That's national security. And the general defense is general. It's security for every state, for every American, rich or poor, black or white, male or female. When Americans are secure, Americans are secure. And we use federal money to do something that is general, and it's not to encourage it, it's to provide for that
Clearly,
defense.
The word is provide for common defense. The next phrase or clause is then promote general welfare. The general welfare, not provide, promote the general welfare.
Now, I think there were
the
Federalist papers that were written to help make that point and define the fact that to promote general welfare is not a clause big enough to run tanks through and say that anything that seems like a nice thing to do for somebody is constitutional.
You're right. So I will wrap up with this. Two quotes from two very different presidents. Ronald Reagan once said that revenue is not the problem, spending is the problem. We all know that. But then another quote is this: increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Leadership means the buck stops here. Instead, Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices today onto the backs of our children and our grandchildren. America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership.
Now, wait a minute. Now, who was it who said that? Was that Ronald Reagan?
Americans deserve better, end quote. Then Senator Barack Obama on the Senate
floor. So there's a big
floor.
difference between Senate and presidency,
Big
apparently.
difference. But he is absolutely correct that America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership. Mr. President, here's your opportunity.
Well, and the interesting thing is if you take George Bush's biggest deficit year, which was when Speaker Pelosi was here in Congress, which was 09, or was it, I guess it was, yeah, 09, his biggest deficit was 1/3 of the first Obama, which was $1.4 trillion. So what's the connection between the quote and the action? I think what we need to do is take a very, very good look at what really is constitutional.
Well,
I
think the connection is, in his quote, a failure of leadership.
A failure of leadership. His own words.
His own words.
Thank you, Congressman. It's just been a treat to have you joining us here this afternoon. And I want to run back over to Utah to my good friend, Congressman Bishop.
Thank you. I do appreciate the congressman from Georgia talking about the difference between provide and promote. Let me just go with one historical example of how that works, because I think in one of your earlier questions it said, you know, how are we actually going to handle this spending problem? And part of it is we have to think outside the box and make some things that have been common assumptions not necessarily have to survive. And instead of going with some issues that we're funding right now, which may be too close to people, let me just go back to history. In most of the history books that I do, that I have seen when we taught high school history, they always talk about how this nation came together with the uniting of the railroads, the UP and the Central Pacific joining together, and how the federal government subsidized that process and was the only viable way of getting that done. We provided the railroad system. One of the concepts, though, as I was reading another book that took a closer look on this issue, is that not only did the federal government help with this railroad building craze, but the idea that the federal government became involved changed the mechanism in which railroads were built and the kinds of ways they were built. We paid railroads for every mile of track that was laid, which meant you gave them more money if they went to a mountainous route than on flat land. So many of those routes took a very circuitous route, going through some elevated terrain because they got more money than if they'd just taken a simpler flat route. I won't mention which one, but they refused to put up masonry supports. They put up wooden culverts only for their train tracks. In the winter, they laid track over ice, which meant as soon as the thaw came, the tracks disappeared. Much of our railroad system had to be rebuilt within 2 years of its actual completion. I live in the state of Utah, and my only national monument is the Golden Spike National Monument in my district, in which both the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific came and they passed one another, continuing to lay track because they were paid for it by the federal government, until Congress finally told them, knock the crap off and link up somewhere. And they picked Promontory Summit, which is in the state of Utah in my county, to finally link up. Ironically enough, in 1893, James Hill built, maybe the Madam Speaker has the name of this railroad, Northern Railroad that went from Chicago to Seattle. He did that without any government subsidies whatsoever. He paid private property for running his lines, even during the panic. It survived. It was functional. It was profitable. Sometimes we make assumptions that only the federal government has the ability of doing things, when in reality, we don't. And we forget that, once again, if we were to make states a true partner with us in projects, states have the ability of being creative much more than we do. They have the ability of providing justice for circumstances much more than we do. And more importantly, if the states make a mistake, it doesn't harm the entire country. I think Obamacare may be one of those particular examples where state creativity was going on a proper road with some wonderful ideas that were stopped dead in their tracks, no pun intended, by Obamacare.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you talk about, there was a great little short book, and I don't remember the title of it, gentlemen, that came out with some of the very facts that you just mentioned, and it was a study of how the government in the 1800s got involved in the 6 major industries in America, because the assumption was that the federal government has to get involved in these big industries to make us competitive in an industrial world. They got involved in the oil industry, the steamship industry, the steel industry, and of course the railroad industry. And the example you're talking about, again, the government created this incentive that you're paid by the mile. So among other things they did was they used cheap steel rails, which wore out right away, and wooden ties that were not treated, and also they wouldn't blast, which was expensive to go up a steep grade, but they'd make these long routes back and forth. So the result was the company that used all the government money had a completely a rail line that was, you couldn't maintain it. And as you said, the northern route was done totally with private money. They had to scrimp and borrow. They built a little piece at a time. At the end of what they could build, they'd form a little town, and they'd give them free shipping to encourage the trade, and they built the railroad in pieces that way using the cash that they had. And that, and like the other industries, the steamship, steel, and oil industries, the same pattern occurred where the federal government got involved. The businesses that were using federal money all went bankrupt. And so there was an example where, again, you think the government's got to get involved. The answer was every time the government got involved, the companies went bankrupt. And so that's a good principle. Let's get over, though, to take a look at this big picture of how in the world do we deal with the budget. And one of the big things that everybody's been taking a look at, and I know you know this, gentlemen, and that is that we have this new category that are called entitlements. That is, we pass some law, the law then runs like a machine and spits out money to people. And if you get enough of those machines going spending money, pretty soon you spend a lot of money. And we've gotten to the point now where Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security are spending almost half of the revenue that the government's taking in. And so when you deal with that, as we take a look at overspending, people have projected that if you let Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid continue as they are, there will come a time when there will be no money for anything else in the budget at all. And these are some of the hard choices that we have to face. And it seems to me, gentlemen, as you and as we have made an emphasis on the Constitution, in fact, we have, in the rules package that was passed yesterday, we have created a new mandate that every bill that comes to this floor has to have a constitutional justification. And I think that's the start of where we really have to get at this problem, and that is, what really is the job of the federal government, and can we afford to be all things to all people? I just wanted to let you piggyback on that.
I appreciate that very well, because, to be very honest, this is not an easy task to which this Congress faces. We have spent, we've probably spent 8, 9 decades digging the hole in which we are in. To think that there is a simple way of getting out of it is naive. To think that we can in 1 year maybe get out of this is maybe also naive. We have to start thinking in terms of moving forward in a general direction that would go there. I'm very proud that the rules that were passed yesterday will enable this body, if we decide to do it, to take the time to think outside the box with new ideas. The idea that for the first time we have since the 1960s, we have set aside specific time during the day so that the committees could function, will allow every member on this floor to sit and work in a committee to come up with ideas to reach this goal of how we can control or at least limit the runaway spending that we have had.
I need to stop and interrupt just a minute here, because you'll never say this, but Congressman Bishop, you were one of the main people that helped put that rule in place. And I think the whole country needs to say a big thank you to you, because what you're doing is trying to make Congress just a little more efficient and do a few common sense things. Now, a lot of people might not say that's thinking outside the box, but the box is small down here sometimes, and you've provided us with the idea that we're actually going to get into some of these questions, and we're going to approach them in a systematic kind of way. We're going to take time and not have votes running all day long so people can't focus on their work, and say, now, systematically, what do we have to do to deal with this problem? And I congratulate you on that first step. Also, the rules package that says you've got to have a constitutional justification for everything you bring to the floor. I think we're starting on the right spot.
You make me embarrassed right here. I wish I could take full credit for the time management plans that we are implementing here. I may have said it, but somebody else had to make the decision to go forward with it, and I think it was the right thing to do, because it requires us, instead of running around in circles like a bunch of squirrels on a treadmill or chipmunks on a treadmill wasting a lot of time, we try and focus our energies, and so that when we are on the floor it makes some kind of a difference. Let me just give one other historical example, I think, of what we need to be doing and dedicate ourselves, since I've been throwing out too many already. I believe it was in the first Congress that the issue came up of postal roads, where to draw the line, where would the postal roads for the new post office go. There is some kind of economic benefit of having actually mail dropped along a route. But Congress, eager to get out, said, let's just allow the President, the executive branch, to decide where the postal routes will be, which seems to be a logical thing to do. And I believe it was Congressman Page, I hope from Virginia, who stood up and said, no. Our job of Congress is to legislate, which includes taking the time to agree on where those postal routes will go. It is not our responsibility to give it to an executive branch or a bureaucracy or some other group to come up with all the details. And he forced Congress to stay there, and they did their job. Too often, we as members simply have the tendency of coming up with a grand and noble idea, and they say, all right, we'll empower. I think the language in the TARP bill is a perfect example of where we empowered the Secretary of Treasury to make all kinds of decisions, which were legislative decisions by their very nature. What I hope this schedule allows us to do, and what you were talking about, is to say we have a great deal of work to be done here. We're still looking at ideas. I'm sure there are great ideas out there that will be coming to us from the people as time goes on, but we have to make sure that we dedicate the time not to simply running around in circles playing silly games, but coming here and zeroing in on our task. And it was said by you, it was said by the gentleman from Georgia as well as the gentleman from Louisiana, it's the spending. That's our problem. That's what's hurting jobs. That's what's hurting Americans. That's what's bloating our budget. We need to zero in on that. And until we do that, we will never come close to meeting what the American people expect of Congress to do, nor what we really morally need to do. I'll yield back to the
Well,
gentleman.
I think that Ronald Reagan, you know, he had a way of putting complicated things in simple words. He says, we're buying more government than we can afford. That's not a bad summary of the situation, and it hasn't gotten better since Ronald Reagan was here. We are buying more government than we can afford. And I appreciate your historic examples. And, of course, there's no way Congress can do the example of the postal roads that you made out when we're trying to basically do everything under the sun, be all things to all people. We're going to have to make some decisions saying this is a nice thing to do, but it could be done by a state government or it could be done by the private sector. And we're going to have to make some of those choices and just say, look, there are some things that the private sector and the states cannot do, and we better fund that first. And certainly providing for the common defense is one that has to be up at the front end because the other governments can't do that and the individual citizens can't do that. Whereas when it comes to some of the other kinds of things, such as in the energy areas or education or insurance or a lot of those things, they could be done by other governments. And when we start to get into this, hey, let's do something that feels good about this subject and turn it over to a bunch of administration bureaucrats, we've really lost control of where we are. And I appreciate your bringing us back to ground zero. Now, there have been some shifts. Here's one that's kind of interesting, and it's the trade-off. They always talk about the trade-off between guns and butter, between defense and basically welfare programs. And if you go back to 1965, the entitlement spending was 2.5% of the overall budget of GDP, percent of GDP. 2.5% in 1965 was entitlement. Defense was 7.4%. Now we've shifted to 2010. The estimate is 4.9% is national defense. We've gone from 7.4 down to 4.9%, while entitlements has gone from 2.5% to 9.9% in entitlements. And that's getting to that area where if the entitlements continue to climb, as if you just look at demographics, there will be no money for defense or anything else, and the budget will be dominated by just simply Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So we're going to have to ask ourselves, what are the top priorities? We're going to have to fund those and do a good job at those. That's what I was getting at. I don't think we can have the mentality of just saying we're going to take 10% out of everything or 30% out of everything. I think we're going to have to make some decisions. Some we may not want to cut. We just want to make them more efficient and leave that amount of money in it. And other ones we may say, it's not a matter of cutting it. We don't even need the thing at all. Let's just get rid of that entire functional area. And that's where we have to be going. But again, where we started today is the right place with the U.S. Constitution and making the key distinctions that the Constitution makes so clear. There's a difference for providing for defense and then in basically encouraging general welfare. And I appreciate your very specific historic examples. And if you remember the name of that, there was a book. I don't know if it was the same one you were quoting from, but it had the examples of those 6 industries, all of them where the government was in subsidizing the corporations. There was all kinds of corruption, and the companies all failed, and the ones that stayed away from government funding are the ones that stayed in business. Just a fascinating study.
If I could just add one comment to that as well. I think it is very clear that we need to say it is not that the federal government will always be bad and is incompetent of doing things. The problem the federal government has is the size of the federal government. Any big industry has waste, fraud, and abuse. And that is one of the reasons why if we could coordinate and work with local governments, that's why the old cliche that the government's best is the one closest to the people. It's not necessarily because they're smarter or better. It's because they don't have the problem of size in a one-size-fits-all issue, and they have the freedom to be creative. As you're talking about, especially with the entitlements, this is an area in which creativity is going to be the most important element. And some things, especially with the costs of Medicare, are driven by one-size-fits-all federal mandates and federal decisions, when allowing creativity could help us solve this problem. I also want to say one other thing, too, when your comment about the general defense is so significant. It's not because we are funding for the defense of America today. The decisions we make, the plans we make for defense today, will not come to fruition for another 10 to 15 years. And indeed, the ability for us to have diplomacy in the future depends on wise decisions that we make today. I appreciate the gentleman from Missouri coming with this issue. This is something that the people care about. It's something that Congress cares about. I think the fact that we just passed a 5% cut on ourselves with an overwhelming bipartisan support says that this is the direction we should be taking, and we should continue to talk about this over and over and over again. I appreciate you allowing me to be part of this.
Well, it's just a treat to Congressman Bishop to have you here with us today talking about a very important subject, something that is on the front of the minds, I think, of many Americans, understanding that we are buying way too much government than we can afford. And certainly the guiding compass and the guiding light for us has got to be the U.S. Constitution. And the fact is that we had hundreds of years of history, or at least 100 years of history, where the Constitution has stood us in very good stead. And when we get away from our foundational documents and principles, that's when we start to really get into trouble. And the principle on defense that was just made, I have to underscore. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. We deal with defense issues day in and day out. And the problem in defense is that the things that are on the drawing board today won't be fielded for probably 10 years in the future. So decisions that we're making today are going to have their effect a long way out. And that's why we have to be particularly careful. The situation in defense is one that, as you take a look around the world, we are rapidly being challenged by China and Russia, and we are not keeping up in those arms situations where we do not have the capability diplomatically to have options that were otherwise available before when we had put enough funding into defense. And so as we see entitlements increasing way, way, way up and defense being cut down as a percentage of GDP, we are risking not doing the most fundamental principle in the preamble of the U.S. Constitution, which is providing for the national defense. And our objective, of course, is not parity. We're not trying to be equal with other nations. Our objective is to be overwhelmingly superior. That's why we don't have wars, because of the fact that people say we don't want to take on the United States, and it's why we can be a great nation of peacekeeping because of the fact that we have been strong and successful and set a good example for other nations. And so what we have before us is a very difficult question. It is the question of politics in America. If you take a look at all of the fights, the debates, the discussion that go on in politics in America, most of it revolves around this question, and that is, what should the federal government be doing? Should it be spending more or less? Should it do that at all? Or are we doing a good enough job? That's what the discussion and debate is about. And until we get back to the Constitution, until we start asking the questions, is it necessary for the federal government to do this function, we will never solve this problem of overspending. The current Congress, and this is my opinion, but one that I think other congressmen that I have discussed this with share, and that is we have another problem, and that is the House and the Congress is a product of a lot of time. There are various fiefdoms and ways that we have gotten accustomed to doing things which may not be very logical or practical. I've been here 10 years. I have learned about authorization and appropriations and about the Budget Committee and the way we do things. But if we're going to seriously get at this problem, other than shaving a few percent here and there, if we're going to seriously get at the problem of having to radically reduce our appetite for spending, it's going to require changes in the structure of this Congress. And that will be one of the things that you can see we've already started on and are continuing and pledging to continue to do, to take a look at our rules and how the organization is set up so that we can make those hard choices and decisions. There has been a commitment that those decisions will be made in a transparent way, in a way that everybody who is elected to be a congressman, so that every district in this country will have somebody that can stand up and have an opportunity to weigh in and have an opinion. You won't see, as we had in the last Congress, bills that are being written in the Speaker's office and brought to the floor and rammed through in the dead of night. You're going to hear open debate, a lot of discussion, and a lot of ideas being discussed, and I think that's a good thing and a proper thing. But ultimately, we have to deal with the question, what are the essential functions that must happen in federal government? Now, I've just heard that there are going to be some very significant cuts in defense. That's very concerning to me. Why would we be taking the Defense Department and doing major cuts there, and no other department in government is being looked at? This is something that some of us will probably react to some, because we believe we have to control spending, but why do you single out the Department of Defense? We're fighting 2 wars. Why are you going to whack that budget when you have all these other budgets that have never been touched whatsoever? And so we have to take a look at those percentages. When you see entitlements going very, very high, defense budget going low, that signals that we've got to be very careful about the choices we're making, because the choices we make today, 10 years from now, your sons and daughters or my grandsons and my granddaughters may be affected by those choices. So we start out a new Congress, I think, on the right foot. Emphasis on the U.S. Constitution. Emphasis on the fact that we have to be responsible. Emphasis on the fact that everybody in every congressional district is going to have a piece of the action. And the fact that we're going to have to be responsible. We're going to have to be cutting federal spending. You cannot run, as we have in the first 2 years of the Obama administration, with a $1.4 trillion deficit, and that will stop. I thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Steve. Madam Speaker, it's a great privilege to be here on the floor with you, and congratulations to you and the other new members of the Republican Party. We have some extraordinarily important tasks out ahead of us. This afternoon I'm going to be joined by my colleagues, and with the consent of the House, I'd like to enter into a colloquy with them. And so I request that without objection.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. We just heard a very useful discussion on the role of the Constitution and how it plays into it. And indeed, today we did spend actually about 3 hours reading through the Constitution. And I think it was to all of our benefit. We started off with the new Speaker actually reading the preamble. And I think that's a good place for us to start, because we're going to discuss health care today, and we're going to discuss an effort by the majority party, the Republicans, to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act that was passed last session. In that, and this issue has become a constitutional issue, so reading the preamble to the Constitution and Section 1, Article 8, it's useful. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. And then later in Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. It's about the general welfare of the United States that we'll be discussing in this next hour, and that's the welfare of the people of the United States. It speaks to us, the citizens, All of us, whether we are a newborn baby or a senior in the last of life. How do we provide for that general welfare? Last year, in a major step forward, the first time in more than nearly 4 decades, this Congress, together with the Senate and the President, passed the Affordable Health Care Act. A very, very important and extremely useful step in providing for the welfare, that is, the general welfare of the American population. It's a law that makes life better from birth to retirement. Part of this law, a very, very important part of it, deals with what we call the Patient's Bill of Rights. The Patient's Bill of Rights vis-a-vis the insurance industry. I think all of us can go back to our districts, to our homes, and even to our own lives and find numerous episodes where the insurance industry has said, no, you cannot have this procedure, or no, you cannot have coverage because you have a pre-existing condition. Today we're going to talk about the Patient's Bill of Rights and the Republican effort that is now underway in Rules Committee in this building as we speak to write a rule that will bring to the floor next week without one hearing to completely wipe out this extraordinarily important effort to provide for the general welfare of the American people. We're going to discuss that in great detail. Now, for me, this is a very important part of my life. I spent 8 years of my life as the insurance commissioner in California, taking on the insurance companies, trying to force them to honor their commitments, to force the insurance companies to pay the claim of a patient who had undergone chemotherapy, to provide insurance that was contracted for and not to rescind that health care policy. I cannot even begin to count the number of cases that came before me as insurance commissioner where the insurance companies would rescind the policy because the person suddenly became ill and had a very expensive episode. The Patient's Bill of Rights prohibits that. We're going to talk about that. I want to start here, and then I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues. I'm going to give an example of a very dear friend who lived here in Washington. He was a Peace Corps volunteer, married, was working here in Washington, D.C. as the director of the National Peace Corps Association, the Returned Volunteers, had a child. That child had a severe disability. Kidneys didn't work. He was insured. His wife was insured. The pregnancy was insured. The delivery was insured. But that child, on the day the child was born with that pre-existing condition of kidney failure, was uninsurable under the parent's policy. That kind of action is prohibited by the Patient's Bill of Rights. No more would that happen. Men and women, families, pregnant women across this country that deliver a baby that has some problem, that baby will be insured, whatever the condition might be. Our colleagues on the Republican side will bring to this floor next Wednesday, without one hearing in any relevant policy committee, a repeal of the Patient's Bill of Rights. And what of the babies that are born in the future that have some issue? How will they be provided for? The rest of the story is this family has spent 20 years now struggling to provide the health care services that their child needed. They have been close to bankruptcy many, many times. They've struggled through it. The child is no longer a child, a young adult. And under the law today, he has health insurance. Is that what the American public wants from the Republican Party, the repeal of that Bill of Rights that guarantees coverage for that young man? I think not. Let me now turn to our colleague from the great state of Virginia. Bobby Scott, would you please share with us your own views and how this is going to affect the general welfare of the American people?
Thank you, and I appreciate your hard work, and thank you for organizing this special order so we can discuss the problems with repealing health care. You've gone all through the need for health care during your life and how the bill provides assistance for those with pre-existing conditions, limits insurance company abuses like what's called rescission, when you paid your premiums all these years and then finally get sick and they want to cancel your policy right when you need it. Lifetime and annual limits on benefits where they pay a certain amount, and once they get to that, you can be in the middle of a treatment and they're not going to pay another dime for the rest of your life, or at least for the rest of that year. There are many people with chronic diseases who hit up upon these limits very frequently. You've talked about young people on their parents' policies who are working, finally get a job, doesn't cover benefits up to 26 years old. They can stay on their parents' policies. Talked about prevention, the importance of prevention. A lot of people, because of co-payments and deductibles, can't afford the annual checkup. This bill provides for annual checkups without co-payments and deductibles. And for those senior citizens in the donut hole, where they get no benefits, have to, insult to injury, have to continue paying their premiums and get no benefit, we have assistance for them. It is outrageous that they would elect to try to repeal this. No hearings, no nothing, just put a label on it, call it Obamacare, and then expect people to go along with the repeal. You just can't label things and expect people by virtue of the label to take action. They call it government-run health care. No, government-run health care was a single-payer plan. That was defeated. The option of a public option would have been nice. It would have been nice to have given people talk about choice. Well, in the plan that's on the books today, they have the choice of all the plans that anybody wants to sell insurance in their state. They have a choice of all of them. It would be nice to have an additional choice, a choice of a public option where you have the choice of a policy that is not run by a for-profit corporation with a financial interest in denying you coverage or canceling your policy. It'd be nice to have that option. You don't have to pick it, but it's just nice to have that option. One of the things that we want to make sure is that we have as many options as possible, including a public option if we can ever get there. But when they talk about repeal and replace, there's no replace tomorrow in the rule that they're suggesting. They just want to repeal. We want to know what they're going to replace it with, what they're going to leave out. Are they going to leave out the part where people with pre-existing conditions can get covered? They're going to say, no, you can't get covered. The insurance company gets to decide who has the privilege of health insurance company. They're going to tell young people under 26 to get off their parents' policies. They're going to tell those in the donut hole to get back in the donut hole where they belong. They're going to talk about those that can't afford prevention to get prevention. They're going to tell those who are going to run out of coverage because of the limits that, no, you just, what's good, that's enough, you've had enough, you can't get any more coverage. What are they going to tell all of these people? We need to make sure that we keep this policy, all of these provisions intact. I have no idea what they want to replace it with, but I think if they went step by step and the people looked at the provisions of the bill, they would elect to keep everything that's in the bill today. Now, there's some things that people don't like. When you have a good plan, you have to pay for it. And unfortunately, there are taxes in it because we're fiscally responsible. We're under, when we passed it, we were under pay-go, and they've repealed a lot of that so that they can go trillions of dollars in the ditch without paying for it. We paid for it. And in fact, CBO originally said that the first 10 years of the program would save the budget deficit would reduce the deficit by $140 billion. Now the estimate is $200 and some billion in the next 10 years. So it is fiscally responsible. There are things we can do better together than everybody out for their own, and we need to oppose the repeal of this health care to make sure that people have the protections and the patient's Bill of Rights that they have under this legislation.
I thank you very much. You've raised about 7 of the major issues that are involved in this repeal that the Republicans will bring to this floor next Wednesday without one hearing in any relevant policy committee. A repeal that will affect every single American and affect their well-being, their health, their ability to get health insurance, their ability to stay healthy. So we have an enormous issue before us, and we want the American public to be aware of what's going on here. It is the repeal of the Patient's Bill of Rights. Let me move on to one of our other colleagues from Tennessee, Mr. Stephen Cohen. If you'll join us, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. And I want to first start because this day has been a day that started with the reading of the Constitution, which is a document that we all revere. I have a little pocket copy of it right here. And we revere it. We pledge when we take our oath of office to protect and defend and support the Constitution. But we all know that it's interpreted by a Supreme Court, and it's more a Supreme Court history would have been better today for people to understand. And you mentioned that the foundation of the particular health care bill is in the preamble, we the people of the United States, to form a more perfect union, establish justice, etc., promote the general welfare. Also, in Article 1, which is the legislative article, Section 8, it says that the Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states. And further it says in Article 1 that the Congress shall have the authority to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution of the government of the United States or any department or officer thereof. So in my opinion, I'm a lawyer, but there's lawyers on both sides. There's plenty of justification for this health care bill. Do you know next week when the Republicans will try to repeal this opportunity for Americans to get health care and to wipe out these pre-existing conditions, clauses, etc., will they be coming under the idea that the health care is not part of the general welfare? Will they be coming basically on a constitutional argument that they may make that this wasn't allowed to require a person to buy insurance, even though we can, of course, require a person to sign up for the draft and lose their liberty for a while and serve in the Army, and we can do that. We can conscript soldiers, but we can't make them buy insurance. Is that what they're going to say, or are they going to come and talk about these things that Mr. Scott talked about and say, we don't think that it's a good policy for parents to have their children on their insurance till they're 26, or it's not good policy for women with breast cancer to get treatment at a certain what is their tactics, sir?
Well, I would assume that they'll try to go into their interpretation of the Constitution and avoid the very difficult argument of forcing or eliminating the Patient's Bill of Rights and allowing the insurance companies to engage in gross discrimination based upon sex. Clearly, women are discriminated against by the health insurance company unless the Patient's Bill of Rights is there to protect them. Similarly, the 2 examples that you gave, pre-existing conditions, I cannot imagine that they would even attempt to successfully, or even would be unsuccessful, argue that somehow these protections for the individual are not worth having. I think they'll go into some obscure interpretation of the Constitution. We'll see. It's going to be a debate on the floor. Unfortunately, there will be no hearings to precede that, and there will not be a discussion of the details.
And they will control the amendments that will be permitted to be discussed on this floor. I know Speaker Boehner said we were going to be able to have amendments and be able to have good discourse. As
you know, I saw you in Rules Committee earlier today. It's my impression that the Rules Committee is going to prohibit any amendments on the floor. We'll see. I mean, that has yet to be decided by Rules Committee. We don't know, but surely the one amendment I would propose is Don't do it. Maintain the patient's Bill of Rights. Maintain these protections that we all need. There's not a person in this nation that is not subject to the possibility of an incident that would become a reason for rescission. That's my experience. 8 years hammering the insurance industry. You've got to honor your contract, yet because of the laws they were able to wiggle out of an expensive incident.
When I was a child, I had polio when I was 5 years old in 1954. I was fortunate my father was a doctor, and so sometimes professional courtesy, but I'm sure he had insurance that covered my hospitalization. But there were years later, I think it was 11 years later, I had a tendon lengthening operation that was immediately related to my polio and necessary on my Achilles tendon. That wouldn't have been permitted necessarily if they could have used a pre-existing condition such as polio to have denied coverage. And whether or not how my father dealt with the expense and whether it was because he was a physician, I don't know, but I'd hate to see children in the same situation and parents in the same situation not be permitted to get that type of coverage later on.
Well, I don't know if you remember Congress at the time, but we all, under this law, would have the same policy that every American would have. We wouldn't have any different policy than that the American public would have. And the question about rescission, I mean, you're a prime candidate, should you lose office, which you shouldn't, to be uninsurable if the patient's Bill of Rights were repealed. Under the patient's Bill of Rights, if you were to leave Congress, you could get an insurance policy because the pre-existing condition that you have, polio, and an operation resulting from the polio would go into play as a pre-existing condition, and you would not be able to get an insurance policy.
Let me, if I can, read something that I had prepared for today. It came from a constituent's story, John Hopkins, and I know John Hopkins, and a very important and active citizen in my community and a contemporary. He sent me an email, and Mr. Hopkins requested I share this story with the House as we consider the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. I want to share it with everybody here on C-SPAN. John was diagnosed with 2 unrelated cancers during his life. If you know anything about cancer, getting it twice for unrelated reasons is almost unheard of. But it happened to John Hopkins. Midway through his first bout with cancer, he was, of course, dropped from his health insurance plan. He was left with a medical bill that wiped out his and his wife's entire retirement savings, as well as the value of their house. They were never able to repay the debt in their lifetime. When he was diagnosed with a second bout of cancer 2 years later, he had no health insurance because there was no insurer anywhere in the market who would offer him a policy because of the pre-existing condition. He got some coverage in Tennessee because of a plan called Access Tennessee for uninsurables, but it was limited to $250,000 a year. As we all know, annual limits are set to be phased out by 2014 because of this law, and lifetime limits are already a thing of the past. $250,000 may seem like a lot of coverage, but when somebody needs something like a bone marrow transplant to cure their leukemia, that single treatment would exceed the annual cap. My Republican colleagues have decided their first priority as the new majority will be repealing the Affordable Care Act. And when they vote to do this, they will be voting for the following: denying Mr. Hopkins the ability to enroll in a health insurance plan that doesn't discriminate against him for daring to be diagnosed with cancer again. They will deny John Hopkins the ability to enroll in a health plan that will actually continue to cover his treatments after he exhausts a current annual cap of $250,000, an amount that many cancer patients meet in a matter of weeks upon diagnosis, let alone those who are fighting 2 cancers over a number of years. And they will send a message to John Hopkins that every other single American who's ever been diagnosed with or will ever be diagnosed with a disease like cancer, that they're on their own when it comes to coverage. That sure, they're free to get treatments and meet with their doctors, undergo laborious and life-saving surgeries year after year, just so long as they can foot the bill or try to keep it under the annual cap. Because when it comes to cancer, budgeting your treatment should surely take precedence over everything else, right? Mr. Garamendi, I'm ashamed that we're even considering the repeal of this affordable health care bill. And when I see these numbers, about $250,000, and I think of the fact that the Republicans were against any caps on insurance, on taxes, they realize $250,000 annual income in many places is a middle income salary. But for limitations on health care, they think the insurance company should determine that, and that's enough. And if you've got cancer, it's not enough. Another friend of mine Facebooked me, Jimmy Barrasso. Jimmy worked for a long time for a company in Memphis. He's always been successful. He lost his job with that corporation because he had high cholesterol. He had difficulties getting insurance, and it took him a long time to find private insurance because of that pre-existing condition. He just sent me this on Facebook. He was friending me, and he mentioned it, and I wanted to relate it. There are so many people in this country who are getting benefits and will get benefits, and many of the benefits don't go into effect till 2014. And the idea that this Congress, the 112th as its first act, would do such harm to the general welfare and the American public is hard to fathom, sir.
Mr. Cohen, thank you so very much. Your closing sentence needs to be repeated, that the very first piece of legislation taken up by the new Republican, the Patient's Bill of Rights. It's unfathomable. Let me now call on Frank Pallone, our colleague from the great state of, yes, it is, New Jersey.
Well, first of all, let me thank my colleague from California and each of the other speakers here for the contribution they've made tonight, and particularly when I listened to my colleague from Tennessee talk about those particular cases of individuals that were impacted, because that's really what this is all about. Again, it is amazing to me that the first act of this new Republican majority is to try to repeal a bill, or the health care reform, that really is making a difference for people on a personal level, particularly with the patient protections. And, you know, I thought to myself when I was coming down here, who benefits from repeal? Who could possibly benefit from repeal? Because as many of you have talked about all the people who are going to be harmed by it, who would benefit from it? And the only group I could think of that would benefit from the repeal are the big insurance companies. Because if you think about it, what do they want to do? They want to keep increasing premiums. I read that in your state, I don't know, you may have already mentioned it, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, whatever, is talking about a 50-something% increase. It was unfathomable, these double-digit increases. And, you know, we, of course, as this health care reform kicks in, it's going to be more and more difficult for the types of increases that we've seen in premiums that these big health insurance companies have put forward. And the reason they want to get rid of the insurance companies want to get rid of the Patient's Bill of Rights and reinstitute all these discriminatory practices, whether it be, you know, denying care because of pre-existing conditions, or reinstituting lifetime caps, or, you know, the different protections that we've seen kick in. The reason they want to do that is also money-oriented. In other words, you know, they have to pay out money. You talked about the cancer person. I was up at the Rules Committee earlier, and Mrs. Slaughter was talking about someone who had cancer and was treated and ran into the lifetime cap, and then the cancer reoccurred, and there wasn't, and she didn't have any more coverage because she had hit the lifetime cap. And that's a perfect example. They want to have lifetime caps. They want to have annual caps. They don't want pre-existing conditions. They don't want your kids on your policy because it saves them money. That's the way that they make profit and pay dividends to their shareholders, is by raising premiums and having discriminatory practices that eliminate the people that cost money because they need health care. I mean, it's that simple. And already, just in the last few weeks, provisions have kicked in that go against that. We had the President announce, or the White House announced, I think, around Christmas time, new regulations that say that any premium increase that's over 10% will be scrutinized, and they will, you know, try to, under the provisions of this bill and new regulations, to not allow those increases to go above 10%. January 1st, the provisions kicked in that said that 80% of your premium costs had to be used for benefits, couldn't be used for insurance company profits, couldn't be used you know, to pay back dividends to the shareholders. So all of these initiatives that are already kicking in they basically make it more difficult for the insurance companies to make a big profit, and the consequence of that is that health insurance becomes more affordable. Now, the other thing that I was up at the Rules Committee earlier, and it was interesting because I think you mentioned, my colleague from California, that, or one of you mentioned, that we, under this bill, under the health care reform that's in place now that they want to repeal, we get the same health insurance as congressmen as any other American. And, you know, I still have people write to me and say, well, you have your own policy, but you want to give me this, lousy coverage that I'm going to get under the health care reform. And I have to write back and say, no, that's not true. You may hear that on some TV station or something, but it's simply not true. We specifically wrote into the bill that we have to go into the exchanges just like everybody else. We're going to be different from other federal employees as congressmen because we go into the exchanges. And so at the Rules Committee today, one of the members, one of the Republican members who is very supportive of repeal said that he specifically wasn't going to take health insurance as a congressman, and he wanted me to know that because he was voting for repeal. And I said, well, that's very nice and that's commendable for you, but I frankly think that every member of Congress who votes for repeal should say, I don't want health insurance for the federal government. Because if you're going to deny it to everyone else, you should deny it to yourself, just the way we're saying that we're going to get the same coverage as everyone else. Well, if you don't want everyone else to have the coverage, then you shouldn't get it yourself. And I know that some members have already taken issue. There was one member from Maryland who came to the orientation, a Republican member from Maryland, who apparently was a big advocate for repeal. And he said that he was inquiring because his federal health insurance didn't take effect as a congressman until February 1st. I mean, we were sworn in yesterday, but I guess it takes 30 days before the insurance actually kicks in. He was complaining about the fact that he had to wait till February 1st to get his health insurance as a congressman. Well, again, if you're going to vote for repeal next week, you shouldn't be worried about when it's going to kick in. You shouldn't be taking it at all, in my opinion. So, there's a lot of, there's, I don't know what the word, smoke and mirrors or whatever the word is that going on around here on the other side of the aisle in how they're viewing this. And my point is, there's a lot of protection here for people. Don't deny them that unless you're going to deny it to yourself. But more than that, think about who's helped by this repeal. Only the big insurance companies. They're the only ones that are going to benefit. I know you were the insurance commissioner, and so you know exactly what I'm talking about. I yield back.
I do have some experience on that. I want to